we've burned out our glucose stores, the body cannot convert fat into sugar to give back to the brain. So if you don't have appropriate glucose forming processes in your body, then your body starts to break down proteins. Have you ever seen someone who's had a stomach or gastric bypass surgery, and you see how their muscles atrophy rapidly, but they'll still have this heavy, thick skin, and that fat is still just hanging in the skin? The body, once you bypass its normal amino acid digestion and amino acid processing in the stomach, it loses its enzyme and digestibility of proteins, and now it has to go and consume your own body proteins, which are already stored, which are your muscles. And the people with the gastric bypass, you'll see they're actually losing muscle mass rapidly. And you'll just see it. When you look at their blood labs, their protein levels will start to go down in the tank. Their albumin levels will go in the tank. And it's a tough situation. I have a friend back in Oregon who is a colorectal surgeon. He says when he sees people who've had gastric bypass, they come to him and say, my body's going crazy, what can you do for me? He just shakes his head and says, go back and see the surgeon that did the surgery for you. Go back and see the person that did the procedure for you, because I can't help you. And it's a sad situation. It's tough. Okay? So proteins are the only thing that can go through a process called, again, gluco, sugar, new, genesis formation. Proteins are the only thing that your body can use to make sugars again for the brain. And that's why then a person with hypoglycemia will often feel thin, or they'll have underneath, I feel soft on the outside and it doesn't seem like my muscles ever get toned. The hypoglycemic person will a lot of times be very lanky and thin because they're actually consuming their own proteins to maintain the sugars for the brain. Okay? The other side of that though is when the closer they're getting to burning out the pancreas, their insulin is surging so rapidly that they actually can't get the sugar stored into the cell, so they'll quickly turn their sugar into fats, and then you have an elevation of cholesterol and triglycerides in your blood. Okay? And that's where you'll get you're pre-diabetic. The question, though, that started this was, why do I feel hungry or not satisfied until I've eaten sugar after dinner? Well, when you're looking at this process, normally sugar, as you eat it, as your blood sugar starts to spike, the original drawing was going to be in your body, okay? As soon as you start to eat sugar, sugar is actually absorbed in the mouth. Remember somebody who's in a diabetic coma, or not a coma, but a diabetic shock? You're going to put sugar in their mouths, right? Orange juice or a hardtack candy, sugar on their tongue, something to just bring the sugars up, bless you. Because sugar is absorbed in the mouth, okay? And sugar is actually absorbed in the whole alimentary canal. As soon as we go to the stomach, to the small intestine, sugars are being absorbed all along. That's why alcoholics so quickly are affected by drinking alcohol, because that's a sugar and it's quickly absorbed and goes and affects the midline cerebellum. It's already being absorbed. When we look at this though, hydrochloric acid has to break down the proteins, and then further down the bile salts have to be able to be in conjunction with this to be able to further break down sugars and, more importantly, the fats. And that's when we get the absorption and digestion of those. Okay? So, why do I still feel like I need sugar? What should happen is, as the sugar is absorbed into the bloodstream, through the intestinal lining, it should go through the liver, and then the sugar should go out to the fat cells, and a hormone called leptin should be released. Okay? Leptin is released into the bloodstream and goes to the brain and says, I've had enough sugar. But when you've been in a hyperadrenia state, cortisol inhibits the release of leptin, and so you never feel satiated. You can eat and eat and eat, But until you actually get the sugar into your mouth to go straight to your brain and say, oh, I've got some sugar, yay, thank you. It didn't have enough time to actually digest, and your leptin has never been released to go to the brain and say, I'm satiated. Does that make sense, Amy?
I've read, I think it was in that thyroid book that I think it said that a good indication of the fact that you ate too much carbs in a meal was feeling that craving for sugar afterwards. That's a good sign that you ate. Was in that book?
Yes. And then the other thing is feeling tired after eating a high carb meal. Yeah. So I ate my lunch. What did I have for lunch? Oh, you know, just the usual, a sandwich, peanut butter and jelly with an apple, and somebody brought bagels and a Diet Coke, right? And 2 hours later, getting the nods. Maybe even not even 2 hours. A half an hour or an hour. Oh man, where's that candy bar? Could somebody go break time? And you start to get the nods, okay? That's when you know that you've fallen asleep at your keyboard, when you look up and there are 6 lines of F's and L's. Oh, wow. You have to backspace all the way through that, right? Okay. So that's what we're looking for, though, and that's why that does that. The cortisol, due to a hyperadrenia output, a stress hormone output, does actually inhibit that. Now here's an interesting thing. Let's look at, and then we'll come to this. Do you have a question first?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I'm understanding it. So too many carbs will cause that?
Correct.
So if we eat a high protein meal, then the body's going to release more leptin?
Yes,
Okay.
because it doesn't cause the huge spike and the big lows. Okay, so we'll go through that. We'll actually talk about how do we correct a hypoglycemic state. Okay, please.
That's kind of, that might be why, I don't know if any of you have ever tried the stupid Atkins diet, but if you eat a hamburger, you're hungry an hour later, but if you just eat the meat and not the bun, you're not hungry an hour later. It's
Correct.
weird.
It is.
It doesn't have that carb thing to throw the balance off.
That's right.
It doesn't make sense, really, but it does make sense.
Yes.
But yet they say, you know, on your food pyramid, you know, if you go by that, that you need to have more grains than anything else.
Yeah, and that pyramid should be turned on its head with the peak cut out. Because the peak is you should never or infrequently eat sweets, right, at the top.
Right, right.
But the whole basis of it is carbohydrates, which is really Americans putting their head through a feed stanchion and just, more grain. We're just getting fatter and fatter, right? We eat grain. If you raise calves, Whitley, if you want to show a calf at the fair, you feed him grain or grass and hay all summer, and then 6 weeks before fair you start to grain him, right? Because you want his meat to marble. You want him to look a little more plump. That's how they grade the meat, how fat he is, okay? And that's the same thing that we as Americans are doing. We eat corn and wheat and grain for every meal, and it's just like sticking our heads through a feed stanchion and just,
So
serve
we
us
should
more.
have more fruits and vegetables.
That's right.
But not just sugar.
No,
So
There's
it's
a
not,
difference
shouldn't
between-
be turned upside down.
it should be.
Oh, without the sweets.
without the spike. Meaning that the peak of the pyramid should be cut off. Turn that thing upside down and make that your basis.
Okay, so
Meaning,
fruit and vegetables,
the fruits
and
and
then the
your
protein.
vegetables and fruits should be your basis.
And
then your
then-
proteins, and then some grains sparingly.
Well, and you need, they say fat sparingly, but
You
you need a lot
need
more fat.
good fats.
fat.
That's right. And the same thing with salt.
Yeah.
Salts are what cause every potential in our body to occur. Have you ever met somebody who has no potassium in their body? That's the person whose heart is in tachycardia, and then it goes into bradycardia, and then they're dead. Okay, you can die from a lack of potassium very quickly. Okay? Have
So
you ever
should
seen a
have
cow?
salt or you shouldn't have
You should
salt?
have salt. You should have good salt. You should consume good
Like
salt
sea salt
daily.
or something?
Like sea salt,
Real
not iodized salt. I'm talking about,
But you need iodine.
no, there's plenty in the diet. You don't, see? So here's what we've been indoctrinated, haven't we? We've been told all our lives, remember in 7th grade health class, you have to eat grain, stop eating salt, and stop eating fats, or you're going to die. Well, 70% of your brain is fat. If you aren't feeding that fat brain, you're dying. Dementia and Alzheimer's is atrophy of the fat stores in your brain. Okay? The number one cause of atrophy of fat stores in the brain are statin drugs. The number 4 drug prescribed in America is Lipitor. Okay? We're causing our own Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. If you want to make a great investment, go and invest in the Silly Farm. Go make an Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease home. Okay?